Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new episode of NuReview. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Gary Numan's 2011 album, Dead Sun Rising. Dead Sun Rising is released on September 15th, 2011. This is going to be, I believe, his 19th studio album if you include his work with Tubeway Army. This is going to be released on his own Mortal Records, and like the album Jagged before it, which came out in 2006, this album is going to be co-produced by Ade Fenton. Although here Ade Fenton does have co-writing credits on every song. The album sees a lot of Gary Numan's live band on it, Steve Harris on guitar, Tim Mudaman on bass. Ade is going to be doing keyboards and piano, as well as programming. Gary's going to be playing keyboards and vocals. Now, most of the songs on this album are actually, interestingly enough, kind of throwaways from previous songs, or from previous albums, I should say. I think that The Fall and When the Sky Bleeds, He Will Come in particular date back as far back as 2000 from the Pure album. Although I don't think that none of these songs really are quote-unquote throwaway songs. So let's get right to it. The album opens with the song Resurrection, and Resurrection, interestingly enough, is the first proper instrumental opening song by Gary since 1979's The Pleasure Principle album. The song slowly builds up from these low frequency atmospherics that last for the better part of about a minute and a half before we're just blasted by this wall of noise. And finally a drum beat does come in, and it's joined by this very sampled vocalizing as well as this very throbbing liquid bass. And the song builds as more vocals are added to it, and the instrumentation becomes much more frenzied and frantic and frenetic before it just all builds to a head and just dies. The first kind of proper song on the album is Big Noise Transmission, which, kind of based off of the title of the song, it opens with this this radio frequency interference sound effect before it just picks up with this very simple drum beat and these kind of undulating synths. And when Gary starts singing, interestingly enough, he's singing practically the same exact vocal melody from the song The Angel Wars from 1997's Exile album. This song, though, is much more busy. It feels a lot larger, and it's just so much more powerful, both in terms of performance, execution, and production. Just Gary whispering, "Come on, little fucker, you can let me out," in and of itself is one of my favorite moments on the entire album. And by the time of the second verse, you do get these multi-layered vocals, which isn't necessarily something that is... It's not something that most people are going to pick up on or say, oh, hey, that's really cool, but I think that it's really cool. And the song itself, just in terms of production, it's so much better than anything found on the Jagged album, and this coupled with Resurrection does really help to put Dead Sun Rising off to a great start. And then next we have kind of the pseudo title track Dead Sun Rising, although here it's S-U-N, whereas in the title of the album it's S-O-N. It's a slower, more atmospheric number than Big Noise Transmission, but it's not a ballad by any stretch of the imagination. The lyrics here are a lot more menacing. I mean, the chorus itself sees Gary singing, "I've seen gods bleeding, I've seen worlds burn, I've seen stars falling, and I've seen a dead sun rising." Instrumentally, again, it's a bit more busy than most of the material found on Jagged, but it doesn't feel... It doesn't feel busy. It feels like everything that's going on instrumentally in the song is there for a purpose. And there's this synthly that comes in a little over 2 minutes in, and it just kills me. And the distorted bells that come in underneath it complement it, and it's just this amazing moment on the song. And I mean, we're 3 songs in, and there hasn't really been a bad or unmemorable one, and this is really big feat. I mean, I don't think this has happened since Dance in 1981. And the fourth song is When the Sky Bleeds, He Will Come. It opens a little bit more calmly than Dead Sun Rising, though the tempo is a little bit faster. Gary singing that he thought he heard someone crying over this skittering drum beat. And at the end of the verse, these wailing guitars and pulsing synths just rise up out of nowhere, and they propel us into the pre-chorus and chorus. And the chorus here is anthemic in kind of in the same way that pretty much every chorus on the Jagged album was anthemic, but here it's not just the same line repeated over and over again like it was on Jagged, and it doesn't seem as cut and paste as it was on that album as well. And as the song goes on, the lyrics become a lot darker. In the second verse, instead of hearing somebody crying, he's seeing angels falling and the sky bleeding. And this recently has kind of become a live favorite since the release of this album, and it's really easy to see why. I mean, this is another stellar song. The next song is For the Rest of My Life. The song opens with a very simple drum beat and some throbbing synths before we're treated to some acoustic strummed guitar, which leads into and plays during the first verse. The lyrics are ballad-like, but the tempo is a little bit faster. Gary sings, "Look around, do you see? Everyone looks lonely, but it's only you and me." And the acoustic guitar becomes much more prominent in the second verse, and it's really nice to hear this instrument. I think that the last time I heard it in a Gary Numan song was was a song on Exile. I think it was the second to last one. I can't remember what its name is off the top of my head. It's a lot more sparse instrumentally than anything that has come so far on the album. But the vocal delivery and the lyrics are delivered with such emotion, and I mean they're practically heartbreaking in some points, and I haven't felt this moved really by a Gary Numan ballad since Absolution from the Exile album in 1997. The next song is Not the Love We Dream Of, which now kind of is the first ballad on the album. It's mostly played on this very reverb-heavy piano. With the whisper, everything you know is torn away and life just stops, Gary sings over this piano line, and we get this squalling guitar kind of underneath the murk. And these synths also come in during the second and third verse, which does kind of help to drive the song along. Now, Not the Love We Dream Of is not a bad song by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, as far as ballads go, it's going to be one of Gary's better ballads, but I feel like the impact of it is lost putting it right after For the Rest of My Life, which is a more gut-wrenching ballad than this one is. And up next we have The Fall, which opens with this guitar line before this bass line comes in and just kind of mirrors it, and then the drums come in and we are just launched into a much faster song. I mean, this song, it's kind of, a lot of people would say that this is the highlight of the song. I think that Gary might actually agree with that. This really kind of is the one song from the album that he continually plays at almost every show. It's musically heavy and pounding and dark like a lot of the songs from Pure, but the production, again, I mean, Ade Fenton really stepped up his game this time around from Jagged. I mean, I would say that this song is probably better than any from the Pure album. "Do you fall like rain on the crying?" asked Gary during the chorus, and it's one of my favorite lines on the entire album. And I do also love the little "hey" that Gary does after the first chorus. There's this kind of quiet part right there when he does that. There's an intense bridge towards the end of the song before it leads into the last chorus. Gary is menacingly whispering, "How does it feel living in the black of your soul?" I mean, there's a ton of stuff and praise that I could give towards this song, but I gotta talk about the next one, which is "We Are the Lost." I mean, this opens up with this distorted, crunchy drum beat that just pounds away before we get this really distorted synth line that cuts in. It almost sounds reminiscent of one of the heavier, more electronic songs from Nine Inch Nails' 2008 instrumental album Ghosts 1 through 4. And it all drops away as Gary sings, "We are lost in the dark, we are lost and afraid," and his vocals are treated under this very reverby, echoey effect. And once the first verse ends, we're treated to some swelling synth pads and distorted guitar before the second verse starts up. Lyrically, I mean, this song, there are not a lot of lyrics to the song. It's very short and sweet and to the point, but instrumentally, the song is all about atmosphere and build-up. I mean, towards the end, we get this exotic percussion and synth lead that makes an appearance, and it's this really big feeling song on an album full of big feeling songs. And the next song is For the Rest of My Life, Reprise, which opens with a slow piano line that echoes the vocal melody from the first version of For the Rest of My Life, and it reminds me a lot of the Down in the Park piano version, which was a B-side to, I think it was either We Are Glass or I Die You Die. I'm probably wrong. Anyways, whatever it was a B-side to, or This Wreckage. Okay, I'm pretty sure it was a B-side to This Wreckage. I mean, this song, the acoustic guitar is still here, the piano is still here. We get a lot more strings in it. Yeah, strings make an appearance. They didn't in the original version of For the Rest of My Life, but they do here. And once the vocals do come in, it's really just the final verse of the song. And like the vocals on We Are the Lost, they're very echo heavy, they're very reverb heavy. It's not necessarily a bad song, as it really is a nice break after the really frantic previous one. It just feels a little bit unnecessary as an album track. It would have made a great B-side, though. And the next song is Into Battle, which is an entirely instrumental song, the second one on the album. It opens with this piano line that's soon joined by this metallic clanging percussion and dissonant beeping and wailing. I mean, again, it sounds a lot like something from that Ghosts album by Nine Inch Nails. And finally, about 2 minutes in, we get this really driving beat that helps to propel the song forward into these murky sound effects that we're hearing. I mean, and again, like We Are the Lost, not only does it remind me of those songs from the Nine Inch Nails album, but this song is all about atmosphere, and it's got a ton of it. A second piano line comes in towards the end of the song, as does the squalling synth lead. And 15 seconds before the end, it all just, boom, just drops away. And the final song on the album is Not the Love We Dream Of piano version, which, as the song suggests, is a piano version of Not the Love We Dream Of. It's very much like that piano version of Down in the Park that I mentioned earlier. Now, oddly enough, though, this version was supposedly entirely performed by Aid Fenton. Apparently, Gary is nowhere to be seen on this song. I mean, but again, it does kind of... On one hand, it feels like a wasted opportunity. On another hand, it's kind of a nice, somber way to close out this album, an album as frantic and aggressive as this. But whereas the reprise of For the Rest of My Life was interesting and added some stuff to it that the song, or that the original version of the song didn't really have, here we're not really given anything new. And so in that regard, I think that this is more of a wasted opportunity. If anything, the reprise of For the Rest of My Life probably would have made a better closing track. And that's my review of Dead Sun Rising. So, Dead Sun Rising holds a very special place in my heart in that it was the first album by Gary to be released since I had become a fan. I had gotten into him in around 2008, 2009. I had seen him perform with Nine Inch Nails at their Hollywood Palladium show. I had seen his show at the Fillmore in 2010 for his Pleasure Principle Retro Tour, and at that show he actually played early versions of The Fall and Big Noise Transmission, although at the time Big Noise Transmission was called Zulu. Um, and I remember just being incredibly excited about this album when it came out. I actually bought it when I saw him. I saw him at the Observatory in Santa Ana in 2013, maybe a month before Splinter came out, and I bought this album there, but I've lost it somehow. Um, I think that Big Noise Transmission is a vast improvement over what was heard on Jagged. Jagged was pretty much just kind of the same song over and over again. Dead Sun Rising, really every song has a specific feel to it, whether it be something as aggressive as The Fall or We Are the Lost, or something as subtle and heartfelt as Not the Love We Dream Of or For the Rest of My Life or the piano or reprise version of those songs. I think that this is probably Gary's most varied album. I'd say it's probably his most, not his most atmospheric, because I think Jagged was a lot more atmospheric than this, and I think Dance is a hell of a lot more atmospheric than this. But it's his most varied album in terms of instrumentation. Um, it definitely feels a lot more live and kicking than Jagged was, and to an extent more than Pure. Um, and I mean, I really enjoy this album a lot. This is a Gary Numan album that I go back to very, very, very often, and I would say it's one of my favorites. There's not really a song on it that I dislike, although the piano version of Not the Love We Dream Of is a bit disappointing. Um, it's not going to be as skippable as something like Your Fascination or The Skin Game. Now, it's I wish he would play more off of it, at least here in the US. Um, he toured for it in the UK. I really want to see some of these songs live. I've only seen him do a few, and they're great, but you know, I really want to see him do Big Noise Transmission again. I really want to see him do Dead Sun Rising again. That's just me complaining about my own personal thing, though. Um, yeah, as an album, I think that Dead Sun Rising is an incredibly solid body of work, and I would say it's his best album. Fuck. Um, I mean, this is his best album, hands down. I would say since Telecon. Um, and I could see some similarities between this song and Telecon as far as the experimentalism of both of them, trying to include different instrumental elements on both of them. Uh, I do prefer Telecon just a bit more, but Dead Sun Rising is an album that, to me, at least so far, I just can't see myself ever getting tired of this album. Um, Favorites would be something like, fuck, I mean, the Dead Sun Rising, When the Sky Bleeds He Will Come, For the Rest of My Life, and The Fall would probably be my favorites. My least favorites, oddly enough, would probably be the last three songs. Um, the reprise version of For the Rest of My Life, Into Battle, and the piano version of Not the Love We Dream Of. It's again, I mean, especially with Into Battle, it's not that Into Battle is a bad song by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually very interesting, at least as far as composition and instrumentally, um, just compared to everything else, I just don't think it's as powerful of a song. I mean, I want to say more. And I feel like this album is very divisive in Gary Numan's fan base, whereas a lot of people either really love it or they really don't like it. Um, I mean, I've seen some people describe it as something like Splinter Light. And while Splinter is a very great album in its own regard, I prefer parts of Dead Sun Rising to parts of Splinter, and I think that Dead Sun Rising actually, as a whole album, plays better from front to back than Splinter does from front to back. I mean, there are some songs on Splinter, you're going to find out once I put the review up, that I will happily skip. There's not really that feeling when I listen to Dead Sun Rising. I want to listen to Dead Sun Rising really from front to back. I think, yeah, I mean, like, Splinter is really great in the sense that you can cherry pick a lot of the songs and a lot of them really work on their own. Dead Sun Rising is great because not only do the songs work on their own, but they also work as this collective whole. And so, again, I'm not spoiling my review of Splinter. You're going to see it. But with Dead Sun Rising, I think that it's a more special album than Splinter is. And so for that, I mean, it's not quite a 10. It's not the pleasure principle. But I would say I enjoy it almost as much or as much as Telecon. And so because of that, I would go so far as to give Dead Sun Rising a 9 out of 10. And this is a very high rating. This is probably the highest Gary Numan album rating I've given since Telecon. That's that's 31 years difference between these two albums. Um, and I feel like there's more I want to say about this album, just because I feel like it's very underappreciated. Especially by Gary himself. Gary talks a lot saying, oh yeah, there was this 7-year gap between albums, between Jagged and Splinter. And it's just like, dude, like fucking Dead Sun Rising is right here. Like this came out 2 years ago. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? And even though the songs came out of sessions from other albums, I don't see it as a throwaway album. I don't see the songs as throwaway songs. I think that this is a very superb, mature, emotionally and musically complex album. And, maybe time will be much better to this album than something like Jagged. And I just hope that Dead Sun Rising does end up getting the respect that it deserves from his fan base because it's more than deserving, folks. Um, and so that's it, really. That's my review. So did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you agree with me that Dead Sun Rising is incredibly underrated? Do you disagree? Do you think that it is an album of throwaways? Please feel free to leave that comment or any comments in the comment box below, as well as any constructive criticism. Just please let me know how you like this, guys. Up next is going to be it, Splinter, the last Gary Numan review. Abby, this has been a long time coming. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with me so far. I promise my review of Splinter is not going to be a disappointment. It might have sounded like I was bashing it during parts of this video. Trust me, I'm not. You're gonna see how much I like this album in the next video. So until then, this is Tyler King with NuReview, Dead Sun Rising by Gary Numan, 9 out of 10. Thank you, and I will see you next time.